a PETA activist from the UK, a top PETA Asia executive, and his 11-year-old son all went to Africa to protest Ethiopian Airlines' transport of monkeys. The two activists and the 11-year-old ended up in a dank room in an Ethiopian jailhouse. Their long ordeal next on the PETA Podcast with Emil Guillermo. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights, brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, the old-fashioned protest, people with signs, a crowd chanting slogans. It's at the heart of animal rights, giving voice to the voiceless. So as Ethiopian Airlines continues to transport monkeys to laboratories in the U.S., PETA activists went to Africa to speak out for the monkeys and to call for an end to the transport of those monkeys. Only this time, the activists were taken at gunpoint by Ethiopian police and detained. Jason Baker, Senior VP and head of PETA Asia, was with his 11-year-old son Zelik and a third PETA associate from the UK, Ruben Skeets. All three were prepared to protest Ethiopian Airlines when they were taken by armed police and marched to a police station, where they spent the next 30 hours in a small room, detained, without food. They're free now, but as PETA Senior VP Jason Baker says, what he, his son, and Ruben went through is nothing compared to what the monkeys endure when they're transported to U.S. labs. Here's Jason on an experience that either crushes you or strengthens your resolve as an animal rights activist, not to mention an animal rights-only bonding experience with his son, on this edition of the PETA Podcast. Jason, welcome back to freedom.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
Yeah.
It was a rough couple of days, lots of twists and turns, and we got through it. It's funny. The way I've been telling people this is because it's different. Because this time my son was involved. When it's just me, you can do whatever you want. But when my son is with me, I get a little bit more angry. I get a little bit more concerned. We were spending some weeks in Kenya. My son was going to a summer camp. We learned about Ethiopian Airlines, that they were probably shipping monkeys. We wrote them. I knew that since I was close, I would have to do something. But at the same time, I don't always like putting myself in uncomfortable positions. And I knew if we went there, we weren't going to be greeted with open arms. I waited, kept sort of checking to see if maybe we've had some progress, and finally I was told nope. So I was like, all right, I'm going. So my son's name is Zelik. He's 11. And I had to sit down with him because we're a family. He gets a 50% vote. And I explained the situation. I explained what we would do. And I asked him if he wanted to go. We would have to cut our time short in Nairobi. And he was all for it. He is definitely my son. He's compassionate. And so there we were. So we headed off to Nairobi. The day that we were arrested, we had been going around checking out demo locations. We would be giving leaflets to every place we went. We gave them a leaflet, hoping that their management would talk to their managers and it puts pressure on. And we were at one by the National Theater. That one was closed. So I put a sticker on the door so they would see it in the morning. And then we went and got a drink at a cafe down the street. And about 15 minutes later, about 15 police officers, armed, some with Kalashnikov, stormed into the cafe. And I was like, this, we're the only ones there. I'm like, this can't be for us. And then we were told to stay seated when went to go to the bathroom. And then we were escorted out of the place, escorted down the street to the police station, where we spent the next 30 hours detained. There's not a lot to talk about in being detained. It's just you're stuck in a room, it's bored, it's cold. We had a dirty mattress to sleep on. We didn't get any food for 30 hours. And this is the part where it becomes like a family bonding experience that I'm, in my animal rights work, I'm not used to talking about that. But here I'm talking to my son about why we did it. And would we, I asked him what he was going through. And he volunteered to me that if he got out, he would still go and protest them and get detained again. This is after 15 hours of detention, that he would do it again. And I was very proud of him. He got why we were doing it. He got that, we put ourselves in harm's way, or we put ourselves in comfortable positions to make lives better for others. Part of me wants that at the end of the day, this terrible experience to have been a learning experience for him.
And there was no hesitation on his part at the beginning, no fear that there was something that could possibly happen. He was all right with that.
Yeah, he was all right. There was no fear. But then even going through it, even having dealt with the police, he's a good kid. And when the police weren't there to hurt us, having 30 hours to go through it and figure out how we got into the situation. Ethiopian Airlines is a government-owned organization. I suspect somewhere along the way, when we went to these different locations and gave them leaflets, that someone alerted the authorities and they started following us. Somewhere around hour 26, they told us that they were keeping us because they had no evidence that we did something wrong. And but they were like, but do you want to make a statement otherwise? And we're like, no. And you don't keep people because you have no evidence. You keep people because you have evidence. So it was clear that they were trying to silence us from drawing attention to what the government was trying to silence us from what the government-owned airline is doing. And they have a lot of pride in their airline, and they don't want people exposing the dirty laundry, for lack of a better term. And
this brings us to the main reason why you're there. We'll get into more of the detail about what happened once you're there. I mean, first of all, that was a room. It wasn't a cell, or was it a cell?
It was a cold, dirty room. One thing that was different from the rest is that we were kept out of general population. Because we were treated different that way, that we were also kept longer. We were told that normally the police chief who we met with would make the decision on this, but because we were foreigners, and I think because it was a touchy situation that they were couldn't figure out how to squash, that at the end of the day, the decision had to be made from the bosses. The police chief's boss was the commissioner, but it was the commissioner's boss's boss who was going to make the decision.
But the basic reason why you're there, as you were getting to...
The reason we're there, is that Ethiopian Airlines has been caught supporting monkeys being taken from the wild, crammed into wooden crates, shoved into the back seats of the Ethiopian Airlines planes, and shipped halfway around the world to laboratories. We know this from court documents. We know this from violations from the USDA. It's quite clear, and it's the biggest airline in the world still doing it.
And what happens to these monkeys? The monkeys are from Ethiopia, or Ethiopia is just a transporter?
They're from various places where they're caught from the wild. They're not from Ethiopia. Ethiopian Airlines is just functioning as a dirty cargo plane for them. They're facilitating what no other airline will do. Is that they're being, they spend their time in their own feces in these crates, and then they're sent off to American laboratories where almost anything can happen to them. They have chemicals forced down their throats, or starvation experiments, or whatever it might be.
And so this is a big money trade for Ethiopian Airlines and essentially Ethiopia, right?
Exactly. It's so. What is interesting is over the last couple of years, Ethiopian Airlines has become the biggest airline in Africa, and they are trying to build on that prestige. And I always hope that people just didn't realize things, that they didn't understand what they were getting into. And my hope with Ethiopian Airlines is someone somewhere not too high up saw some dollar signs, didn't put it together, and signed a contract. And I'm hoping that they are now in the background realizing the bad image it gets, how unethical it is, and that it's just simply not worth the money. That's my hope. Saying that, while we were in jail, I couldn't comprehend how the government wasn't realizing that holding an 11-year-old is bad PR. I just couldn't. I was just kept saying to the officers that were there, doesn't the government get holding an 11-year-old, bad international press, holding an American 11-year-old child? Nobody thinks that's a good idea. And they would agree with me, but nothing happened from it. cut to the very end of this story. And when we were deported, we realized that we were told, some officials that were with us on our side, the U.S. Embassy got involved. That was one of the bigger things. The U.S. Embassy got involved, and one of the translators for the embassy heard the police chief talking to the commissioner that the higher ups were seeing bad press and wanted us out of the country as fast as they can. Why they didn't see that coming 30 hours later, I'm baffled.
Yeah.
They got tons of bad press, even locally. Locally, they're a little bit more hesitant to speak, and we even had local media talking about the situation.
See, here's the thing, because I don't know do you think people generally knew that Ethiopian Airlines was doing this monkey transport thing? Do you think that was widely known?
Oh, I think generally people don't know. I certainly don't. And I think that officials were trying to cover up whatever they could, even those that didn't know what was going on, because they know that Ethiopian Airlines is a jewel of industry in Ethiopia. There are not a lot of industries that have an international star on them. The airline themselves is rated highly for human passengers. I was deported on them. I wouldn't rate them that high.
I mean, but essentially, you're saying this is the jewel of Ethiopia, but it's like if people realized, number one, not only was Ethiopia holding this 11-year-old and his father, who's an animal rights protester, animal rights activist, but Ethiopian Airlines, this jewel, is essentially transporting monkeys, which is like the modern version of a slave ship, right?
Right, and that's where I think where I was saying I hope that someone lower down didn't quite realize, and higher ups are now realizing they have a contract that they have to deal with. That's where I'm hoping they are, because I understand from the 30 years of work with companies that they don't like to quickly admit mistakes. That's where I'm hoping this whole situation leads to. But we're not there yet, so we need everyone to scream and yell and write in and comment on their Facebook and comment on their Twitter and Instagram and all of those, because we need to keep the pressure on, because it can't just be Americans detained for 30 hours. The end of it. We need the pressure to continue, and it will. We're PETA. We're going to be out protesting at all of their ticket offices around the world, and we'll be handing out leaflets at check-in, and so we will continue to be a thorn in their side. And hopefully, again, you have an airline who didn't realize what they were getting involved with. Hopefully. I'm the eternal optimist. And
tell me about the government there in Ethiopia, because as you were describing the judicial system there. I mean, it's a democracy. It's not. It's not authoritarian.
It's getting more that way. It is a democracy, but it has a lot of difficulties. They have state-owned media that go biased towards who's in the administration. So it's not as open as a traditional democracy
compared to other nations. They're
not as open as, like, say, Kenya. Kenya has a more thriving democracy. Kenya also has street protests when I was there where the government was shooting people. So, I mean, none of them are perfect, but yes, they have a lot going for them. Potentially, there does need to be a little bit of work on their democracy.
But basically, when Americans, most of the people who listen to our podcast, when they see or understand what's going on here, it's a democracy that's sort of heading toward the right and authoritarianism. Yeah. But when people talk about democracies, they talk about rule of law. I mean, that's the important thing. That's the right hallmark of this is what makes you free, because people, they adhere to the laws. And the rule of law here seems like at some point, could someone have passed? I mean, you hear this a lot about third world countries. I'm Filipino. My ancestors are from the Philippines, and they always said, "Oh, just give that guy like a $20 bill or $100 bill, and it'll be all right." And many times it would be. And that's the sign of a corrupt democracy, where rule of law does not work. Right. Is it sort of like that there in Ethiopia?
I wasn't sure, because I kept thinking, when is someone going to ask me for the penalty fee? That's just and it never came. So that's what I don't know. I almost feel like it was something similar, something along those lines, where we were being held probably potentially illegally because they didn't have anything and they were trying to make it up. We did learn that there's a 48-hour holding period, so they didn't violate that. But I think they were taking extra liberties in protecting the government business in the way that they can sort of bribe your way out. You can bribe your way out of something because I lived in the Philippines, as you know, for
that's
almost
right.
20 years. In the same way that you can bribe yourself out of things, they can also use the law to hold you illegally or wrongly, just depending on how they want to do it. They sort of have more liberties the same way, and that's where I felt like it was happening.
Yeah.
Like this wasn't the traditional process that was supposed to happen, because they were trying to figure out how to keep us quiet.
Yeah. And really the balance of justice is the interests of the government versus the shame of holding an 11-year-old kid and his father, animal rights activists. They've got to balance that. And
they had to balance that. And maybe it was something new for them, again, being the optimist, something they weren't used to, something they didn't know how to deal with.
But all throughout, they never thought about the monkeys, right? No one was thinking about the monkeys.
I mean, when you're held for 30 hours, you're constantly like, what are you doing? Like, someone's got to be talking to someone. So you do work in your mind that they were clearly in touch with Ethiopian Airlines, saying, what do we do here? I was arrested in Egypt, in Tahrir Square, 10 years ago at a KFC protest. And they went and they held me for about 6 hours while they got the head of KFC to come talk to me. That's ridiculous. You don't do that. But in the same ways, you could feel that they were sort of looking for direction and didn't know what to do. So there was a British man with us, Ruben, who was fantastic. He's from the UK. He's a great campaigner. And so he called his embassy and I called the US embassy, not to diss the UK embassy, but the American embassy was fantastic. 5 o'clock rolls around. So it's like 24 hours that we've been held now. And I am thinking, well, I got to go home now. And so I'm sort of giving them an out because I feel bad for them. Of course, I'm the one stuck, but you always feel bad for people doing the extra thing for you. So I was like, I understand if you have to go home. And they were like, we're not going anywhere. It's a lot like that. The UK embassy had already long gone. And they're like, we're not going anywhere. And they worked to get us some food. They got us toilet paper. They were there and they were putting pressure all over. And then at one point we're told, this is like 26 hours in, that we're being charged the next morning. And we may be having to stay in Ethiopia for weeks while the court case goes through, potentially in jail for a week. The UK is going to talk the next day. They're done for the day. The US embassy already has the deputy ambassador coming to court with us and arranging for secure cars to take us to the court case. I can't say that I am the most patriotic American in the world, but that day I was really proud of the effort that the government was making for us.
Yeah, and there you were in Ethiopia, and being an American mattered to the embassy, and they took care of you, and they know what a democracy is supposed to be like.
They do, yeah.
And they took care of you.
Yeah, they were great.
To go back to the details, you're in this room, this dank, cold room. There's a toilet. There's a bathroom.
There's, if I could have gotten a picture of one thing, it would be the bathroom. So the police station did not have running water. So once a day, somebody would bring a bucket of water in and pour it in the toilet. Draw your own imaginations from that, but it was not good. And so we would have to ask to go to the bathroom, and we were kept in a small little room, a dirty mattress. I mean, I have to say, like, you get a mattress, and you could have not had a mattress. So to me, that mattress was nice, but you don't sleep. You can hear things going on the whole time, so you don't sleep. I mean, it's hard to explain nothing because you just sat there. How did my 11-year-old get through without a phone? That was his thing too. Afterwards, it was like he's like, I went 30 hours without using a phone.
Well, wait a minute now. Wait a minute. They took away your phones. They
let me use mine sometimes, but he didn't have one. So there was no. And then you have to roam. Your roaming charges. I think I spent $200 on roaming charges just for a few phone calls to the embassy and some emails. So yes, he didn't have one.
So that's actually a plus. You keep your kid from his phone, but you got a phone and you were able to do media calls and to alert people about the situation. That had to help.
It did help. It did help. And at the end of the day, there was worries that maybe the media pressure would backfire. I've been around the block enough to know that it rarely does. That shining a light on it usually makes them want to get out of the situation. And like as I mentioned, we learned at the very end. And so the conclusion of it was we were told we were going to be in for potentially weeks. Ruben, who's with us, is trying to figure out how he tells his parents, and he's freaking out. And I was like, I got this kid here, and do I have my parents fly in to take him because they'll probably release him? The embassy's negotiating his release. Difficult stuff. And the embassy brought some spaghetti, managed to get some spaghetti in for us after 26 hours or whatever it was. Suddenly, the police chief just literally runs into the room and goes, "You're free." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "It's done. Case dropped. Hands us our passports." And I was like, "Let's get the hell out of here as fast as we can." Like, I am not looking for them to change their mind, learn there was a mistake. I was like, "Great." I'm like, gave him thanks, shook his hand, and I was just pushing to get out the door. And while we're waiting for a car, he comes running after us and says, "No, no, no, I have to drive you now." So clearly a call came in to get us out of the country. So he escorted us to our hotel. We had just hired some lawyers and loved them so much because they actually followed the police to make sure everything was kosher. And so we get to our hotel. The embassy folks had been out. They meet us there. So in the lobby, we've got 2 people from the embassy, 3 police officials, 2 lawyers, and us grabbing our bags. And they literally just put us in this police truck immediately and off to the airport. We're escorted quickly through security and everything. And they were like, "When is your flight?" And I was like, "I missed it." And they're like, "Do you want to buy another flight?" And I was like, "Not really." I said, "There's another flight tomorrow." And I knew that there was a flight in an hour. And it was $1,500 a person because, you're waiting until the hour before. That's what they do. Like $3,000 for my son and I to leave. And I was like, "I'm not paying that." They didn't say anything. And they come back 20 minutes later, tickets in hands. They wanted us out of there so badly. They bought us tickets. And wouldn't let us use our phones again, because they didn't want us talking to the outside world to tell people the cruelties. And, they took us right to the plane, put us on the plane. We were on the plane. They closed the door and off we went. And there was so many discussions with my son about this is nothing compared to what the animals go through. And that is a soundbite I use in work, but it was also a reality that day. It was a reality that we really had it terrible. We, in the physical part of it is never as bad as the mental part. The mental not knowing, the mental they could do something. It's always better than your imagination. You never know if they're going to just, you never know. The mental side. I have luckily or unluckily been around the block a lot, and I have been arrested in a bunch of countries: Syria, Egypt, India, Cambodia. And so I sort of know the routine. At the end of the day, we did nothing wrong. If I was smashing windows, if I was actually doing something wrong, I get it. I totally get it. But we didn't do anything wrong. And that was where I knew they had nothing. I knew they had nothing. And that's where, you keep your hope going and what you're doing is paying off. And that you also know, PETA is a wonderful organization. You know that they're not stopping, that there are people around the world putting on pressure, making calls, talking to the media, that whole machine is going while you're sleeping and, while you can't talk to anyone.
And so you're there in that room a total of how many, 30 hours?
30 hours.
30 hours. And they didn't give you food for a lot of those
18.
hours. 18.
First 18.
It was just you and your kid, and there's Ruben, and you're just staring at the walls?
Yes. A lot of talking to, a lot of talking, a lot of assuring everyone that's going to be okay. Like I said, I've been through it a bunch. I never had the worry that others had because I've gone through it. We were talking about like the worst situations because I've had them worse. There was one in Atlanta that I was there for about 10 or 12 hours. And they kept telling me if only somebody would, and I couldn't make a call, if only someone would come and pay your, $100 ticket, we would let you out. And of course, I'm freaking out that nobody is out there. And I'm freaking out for 10 hours. And that just does your head in. The reality was someone was out there the whole time. They hadn't processed things, but that's what they were telling me. And that really sort of does your head in because you feel like you've been abandoned. So we talked. Ruben is new. Assured him. Talked to him about we have similar family histories. For the first 20 years that I was at PETA, my mother was talking about making sure I had a backup plan. After 20 years, she realized, she's like, okay, yep, you did the right thing, and she gets it, and she always supportive. But so it was just talking about how we get through it, and then it was my son. We had a lot of discussions on what we were going through, and I would say, baby boy, we the way we kept warm at night was I just snuggled him on that dirty mat, and we talked about getting through it, and then we talk about like what would we like to eat when we get out of here, and what will be your memories of here. And for sure, all of us, it's the toilet, but it's you get through it step by step, and you.
What did he share with you?
He was shocked. I had to explain a lot of how it went. Certainly, the guys with guns in the beginning was something he was shocked with. They were never mean to him. So, I have to make that clear. They were never mean to him. Just the overall boredom. Yeah, it's just that he just sat there. And even I'm like, how did he get through 30 hours? Like, there's just not a lot to do. But we talked. It's like what they did before cell phones. You talk to people. So we talked about, he and I, it's just him and I. So we talked about what we have been doing this summer, and we talked about what we're going to do next summer. And then with Ruben, he's new to these campaigns, and I love talking to people about my experiences and the things that I've done and in setting up PETA India. And
well, tell me, what was the one thing that you think that you'll recall that you'll always recall that kept you strong?
For sure, when he came in and said you're free, because the juxtaposition of the stress that you're under right then, trying to work out what the next few weeks are going to be like, potentially in jail, to out of here right away. You just what? That was so. That's the strongest thing. The dirty toilet was terrible. The whole. I mean, I'll continue to remember just the march back to the police station with all the armed officers. Part of me was like, do you have the wrong people? Do you know? But they did, because they asked us about Ethiopian Airlines, so they knew. They knew the whole thing. There was very little processing. I never got interviewed. Like, they told me they didn't have anything, but they actually never interviewed me.
Yeah.
They didn't try to interview my son, which I would have freaked out if they did. But they didn't try. They didn't fingerprint me. They took my passport, and that was it. They didn't ask me my address. They didn't even actually ask me if they wanted the embassy to be contacted. I did that on my own. So that was the weird thing. Having been through this enough, there's usually when we were released, we didn't sign anything. We weren't given a piece of paper saying we did anything. So it was like it never happened.
So it was not, technically speaking, an arrest. You were detained. You were detained.
No, because they didn't even tell us. Like, at what point does detained to become arrested, and vice versa? And they never said you're being deported, but they grabbed us, followed us, watched us pack our bags, and carried us right to the plane. That is deported. There's no way around it. We couldn't hang out and go out to the bar that night. We were deported. So yeah, it's like, and that's part of the mental thing. It's like they're not even telling you what's going on. Like, give me a plan. We went in there knowing that we were putting ourselves at some risk. Certainly not that. We thought we would be, told to just be quiet. We had actually, because the plan was the next day we were going to hold a sign in front of the headquarters. Traditionally, they tell you to stop. We stop. We're done. We make our point. And so that was the plan. And so, he was talking about how it was coming through, and how it was happening, and I kept saying, this is us. We get it. It was both to empower both of us and to know that we were in control, as much as it was just a reminder that we sort of knew. But yes, 29 hours in, you start to fray a little bit. I think we helped keep everyone together. We were, yeah.
Is there something you said to each other, to your son, to Ruben?
Well, it was just, I feel like I don't want to dwell too much on my experience, but I did feel like I was calm the whole time. And even when the embassy came in, the representatives from the embassy came in and said, we've actually not dealt with someone quite as calm as you during this. You seem to have you're critiquing how you got here, what they're going to do, and why. Because he suspected they were trying to make an example of us for criticizing the airline, and I had said that, and he said, "Yeah, I think that's what they're doing too." With life, you stress about what you can stress about, and that's, I guess, something I try to teach my kid, because he gets riled up about a lot of things, and I'm like, just stress about what you can stress about. We couldn't stress. There was nothing. Stressing did no good in that situation. So you stress about, if someone's getting things done at the right time, or if you're going to do well on what you need to do. But when it's out of your control, I never stress on those things. And so that's how we got through it. We got through it just, better than most. And the embassy even said that to us. But at the same time, they knew it was stressful to us. They didn't leave. I give them such props for sticking around. And they even, Ruben is British, and they were like, "What do you need?" to him. I was so impressed.
Yeah, I know that your kid is, has had some issues with being still and that kind of thing. It must have surprised you that he came through, and he.
It did. I worried the whole time, and I was like, "Yeah, how are we getting through this?" And I told him multiple times during the thing, because yes, my kid has some ADHD. He's been kicked out of a bunch of schools. Hard for him to stay still. He's not. He's great in academics, but he's got this ADHD thing going on. And I kept having to tell him. I said, I felt like you have matured immensely over this. That you get there's a situation that I can't do anything for you. I can get you water, and I can get you to the bathroom. And this is all we got in this situation. And I can give him hugs and tell him everything is going to be okay. And I think on some levels, he's still at an age where he believes that. And so, and he was great. He wanted to, he still just, he got it. And you don't know at 11 if they're getting it. And this one, he initiated enough conversations on his own for me to know that he was understanding what we were doing, why, and that he would do it again.
So this was probably one of the more memorable father-son bonding situations.
Yeah, I was just writing about it. It's like, it was exactly. It was a family bonding experience from hell. and yeah, it is. And sometimes, I with Ruben, before the whole trip started, I had written to him and said, embrace the chaos, not just in this situation, but going forward. You will remember the terrible experiences. I remember this terrible hotel I got put in Calcutta 20 years years ago. It was just terrible. I remember those things. I remember this. There was an arrest I had in India that I was mentioning. This wasn't so terrible, but they had come and swooped us up off the street and to put us in this paddy wagon. We were doing a leather Council for Leather Exports protest, and the police had been the guest of honor the night before at this event, so they were sort of bought off. And we're in the car, and I'm friends with a minister named Maneka Gandhi in India. And I have my cell phone, so I call her, and I was like, "We shouldn't have been arrested. They just swept us off the street." So as soon as they stop at the police station, I asked to be let out, and they let me out, and I go into the police chief's office, and I hand him the phone, and I hear, "Yes, madam. Yes, madam. Yes, madam. Yes, madam." He hands me the phone back, and she goes, "They're taking you back to the protest now." Back in the paddy wagon, back to the protest. So yeah, we have those and those are the kind of stories I was telling uh, during our 30 hours to try to keep our spirits up and to learn, just shared stories.
Because I think as you share these stories here now in the podcast and activists hear it, it's kind of a masterclass in how to deal with these moments when you're under pressure, there is grave doubt, you might be even threatened, although you don't know the degree to which you're being threatened. And it's a psychological thing, and you have to bolster up against that.
Without a doubt. When you work at PETA, you get these experiences. I have had far more than most in far stranger situations. But straight away, you're taught, don't put yourself, don't say things that can get you in trouble. And we don't really get in trouble, but you don't have to talk about what you were doing or why. And you know the rules. Like, I did a lot of protests for years around America, and the idea of the public easement where you can be is a concept that was so useful to me when the police would come and say, "You're not allowed to be here." And I would say, "This is the public easement, we can be here." I didn't always know if there was a public easement there, but it almost always worked. And so it's knowing that you have to have the right to be heard. In New York City, the right to be heard means they can put you 3 blocks down and you're barely heard. But knowing your rights, knowing not to just accept it. And I feel like that's the thing that I try to instill and teach people in Asia and in America. Because oftentimes when you're new, you don't know. And they just try to tell you can't be here. And you're like, "Oh, sorry." And they leave. And it was wrong. And so we do try to inspire and to show people you can get through it. And yeah.
But there's also this idea that no matter what you're going through, don't forget the animals.
Nothing.
Don't forget the animals.
We had that conversation so many times. And yeah, like I said earlier, it is technically a soundbite we say, but it's true. I say it to my staff a lot on a bunch of different issues that we deal with, because on our worst days, on the worst days that we have for our work, it really is nothing compared to what it is for these animals that are going to these labs through Ethiopian Airlines. It's nothing compared to what the chickens go through on industrial farms. It's nothing compared to what circus animals go through. There's just, the list goes on. And the days that you can't take it and you want to cry, it is nothing. It is. I was in a dirty, skanky, dungy room for 30 hours. I mean, most laboratory animals wish they had it so good. So, and then when you're trying to get the media to push your story out there, you don't want to downplay what you're going through, because there's a mental thing to it still. But at the same time, it really is. There's just, I would do it all over again. And I have done, we and all of us at PETA. I mean, that's who we are. You don't go and work for PETA because you're looking for money. You're in the wrong place if you're looking for money. And it's because you are so dedicated and you learn from it. I'm taking, I had Ruben who was there, who was somewhat new, and we were talking about the whole strategy and how we were doing things, like when we were going to go public with certain things about it, and how we do. It's not just that we sit in a room, that we calculate. We didn't go public locally with our arrest until 8 a.m. And there's a strategy. We're having a terrible time, but 8 a.m. is just before most press have their morning meetings. So you want to have a current Americans lockup story. You don't want to have it come out at 2 a.m. and you don't want to have it come out at noon when they're already working on their stories. So we would still, even in jail, we're still working. And
there was no point where you were so frustrated or so fearful that there were tears, that you cried.
Not for me. I'm not sure Ruben can say the same. I won't speak for him. I don't want to speak for him. But I did at one point nudge my son to give him a hug. Because he was younger. He doesn't have the real world experience, and I felt for him. I felt for, like even me. I didn't tell my mother that they had said we were going to be going to court the next day and potentially for a couple of weeks. I just luckily it came through, and I told her afterwards. So he has, he had a bigger concerns there from people. So it was more difficult for him, but he was great. I hate to even say it because he was still a trooper, and he could have had a meltdown, and he did not. He would do it over again too. It was a lot of life lessons for him, but came through it great. I thought he was fantastic.
And through this all, did the protests actually ever happen, or is it yet to come?
It is yet to come. I'm going to be tight-lipped on exactly when, so it doesn't get stopped. The protests there and elsewhere are all yet to come. But no, we would have. If they had let us out, we still would have, to be honest. Not that we would have tried to come up with every excuse to not do it. Because don't get me wrong, we would have done it, but we wouldn't have been happy doing it. They will be happening all over, and they will be. What we do is we got to keep the pressure on everywhere. Mm-hmm. So it will be not only their offices, but all the media that came out. We'll be sure to fax it to them and post it to them, and so that everybody in all of their offices is seeing all this pressure. But while I was there, this is one little funny thing. While I was there, I went to a florist before we were arrested, and I ordered flowers for the CEO, and there was only a couple different cards you could fill out. There was a birthday and anniversary, and there was a retirement one. So I filled out a retirement card that said, "Looking forward to the retirement of monkey shipments." And then I signed it. So next week, they're to be delivered. And that's just one little thing to just keep it on their minds to remember, I was just planning ahead. Because even good or bad, however that this event went, there was always the next thing to think of and the next thing. And so, yeah.
Well, certainly right now, every people in Ethiopia and now more people are aware of what Ethiopian Airlines is doing. And what can people do if they're listening to this? What can people do to keep up the pressure from where they're at?
Sure. They should go to PETA's social media pages, go to Ethiopian's social media pages and comment. Ethiopian, I think it's Fly Ethiopia on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I know that they will likely block you on Facebook. They're not as quick on Instagram and Twitter, but that's okay if you get blocked, because if you get blocked, you're having an impact. So just go and tell them to stop. Just stop shipping monkeys. That's all you need to say. You don't need to. You can be long-winded. You can tell them what you think, but just tell them to stop. Because the more they get that, the more they're having to block. They're telling their supervisors. Their supervisors are telling it. It's the additional pressure. That is the easy thing. If you live near an Ethiopian Airlines, or if you're traveling, I saw an Ethiopian Airlines desk when I was in Nairobi. I had to run over and say something. Just say, "I heard you're shipping monkeys, and I hope you stop." Talk to a manager. It's just, and then of course sign up to PETA's activist network if you're not already. Everybody should, because when there's protests in your area, when there are protests in your area, we'll invite you to them, and that's always what we need. And human bodies helping us.
Yeah, and so people should always be thinking about the monkeys, and now they can think of Jason, Zellick, and Ruben.
That's right. Hopefully they won't think of us for long. They'll continue to think about the monkeys, and then they can forget about us quickly.
Well, Jason, I've talked to you through many of your adventures here on the podcast, and this was kind of especially with the guns at the beginning. The escort.
We were, when in this 30 hours that we had talking, and I was telling Ruben about the different arrest experience, because there's a lot of them there. And then he kept he's like, where does this rank? And I'm like, oh, it's at the bottom. And then I was like, well, it's kind of in the middle. I'm like, okay, well, it's kind of up near the top. He's like, it changed. It was not the most mentally, but it was just the longest.
Yeah.
I was overnight in the Tombs in New York City when we took over Karl Lagerfeld's office with Ricky Lake back in the 90s. And that was rough because there were people in lockup washing their faces in the toilet and things like that were, freak you out. So, they're different. They're different experiences. There's probably a story about all these arrests somewhere, probably potentially a book of craziness, but for another day.
Jason Baker, Senior VP of PETA Asia, talking to us from Africa. And once again, I want to thank Jason for opening up and being candid about his experience. And as you heard, Jason, his son Zelik, and PETA UK associate Ruben Skeets are all fine. And the protests continue. The protests of Ethiopian Airlines will go on until the transport of monkeys to labs in the U.S. is ended for good. Watch for the next one. For more, go to PETA.org. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link of the show to your friends. Tell them you like the PETA Podcast. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at emilamok, that's EMILAMOK. Or see my vlog at amok.com. Or see my work at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. And get this podcast on YouTube at emilamok1. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe to, as well as rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by CarbonWorks. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.